The new protest visa. Open to citizens of the Philippines and other countries around the globe? Stay as long as the protest is active. Why is it a good idea? When will it happen? Is it free? Let's examine how a protest can benefit a government and why tourism could affect it. Governments use open protests to their advantage. Protests are often viewed as public expressions of dissent, but governments, whether democratic or authoritarian, can actually gain several political benefits from them. While the initial aim of protests is to challenge the status quo, governments can sometimes manipulate or control these movements to further their political agendas. Here's how. First, protests can be a way for a government to demonstrate legitimacy. In some cases, particularly in authoritarian regimes, allowing protests to take place can make the government appear open to public opinion and responsive to grievances. By permitting peaceful protests, governments can project an image of being democratic and willing to listen to the people. This is especially important for regimes trying to improve their international image. Some even allow counter-protests, reinforcing the idea of a balanced system where all voices are heard. Protests can also be used to weaken opposition groups, especially if they appear disorganized or divided. When large protests occur, the government might frame the protesters as a vocal minority, suggesting that the majority of people actually support the government's policies. This allows them to press forward with certain reforms or initiatives, even if they were facing resistance. Sometimes, governments make small concessions to placate protesters, but these concessions are often strategic. They show that the government is willing to listen, which boosts their image without fully giving in to the protest's demands. In some situations, protests can also provide governments with a reason to justify more repressive measures. When protests escalate, governments often highlight any disorder or violence, using it as a justification for stronger security measures, such as curfews or restrictions on movement. These measures are often presented as necessary to restore order or protect national security. In extreme cases, protests can even provide the pretext for a government to crack down on dissent more forcefully, including the use of military or police action. Media control plays a significant role here as well. Governments often shape the narrative around protests by highlighting violence or unrest, which helps discredit the protesters. By controlling how protests are reported, the government can diminish the protest's impact in the eyes of the public. Protests can also be used to gain international support. For governments in power, especially in more authoritarian regimes, framing protests as evidence of a functioning political system can attract international sympathy. The government may highlight the fact that they are allowing public expression of disagreement, presenting themselves as champions of civil liberties. Finally, protests serve as a way for governments to test public sentiment. When large protests erupt, the government gains a clearer picture of public opinion on various issues. If the protests are large enough or widespread, they may signal that a policy is unpopular, and the government can adjust or back off from that policy. Sometimes this happens with the intention of winning back public support, but it doesn't always mean a complete retreat. Governments may simply find a different way to implement their agenda. In conclusion, while protests are typically a way for citizens to voice dissatisfaction, governments often find ways to turn them to their advantage. By using protests to show control, weaken opposition, rally support, justify crackdowns, or gain international favor, governments can maintain their position and push their political agendas forward. Understanding how governments can leverage protests helps explain why some regimes appear to tolerate them even when the protesters are calling for their downfall. Will there be a protest visa available soon? That's a good question. This idea is really one that is hypothetical and a long shot. It is not under any current government creations that we know of. Perhaps this video will begin a domino effect in that direction. After all, possibilities seem to have no limit, and considering the world today and all that is happening, this one has grounds of interest to many. Who knows if there will ever be a protest visa? But hey, anything is possible. Perhaps the most doubtful would be being available to Philippine nationalities. After all, they seem to be one of the most exploited and restricted nationalities for a developing country in the world today. Let's keep our hopes high for a more open visa policy, while also nurturing aspirations for a world where there's less protest and more collaboration, education, and understanding, so we can live in peace and consideration. Please show support, like and subscribe.